On the morning of the 16th of April, 1947, a small fire was burning in the cargo hold of an ordinary freighter tied up at a Texas dock. The cargo was fertilizer. By the time the day was over, that fertilizer had killed close to 600 people and erased a waterfront. This is what happened. The port of Texas City on the Gulf Coast was a busy industrial harbor. Cargo docks, oil refineries, chemical plants, all crowded close together along the water. Tied up at one of its docks that morning was a freighter named the Grand Camp. She was being loaded, among other cargo, with thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer, a manufactured chemical bound for farmland overseas to help grow crops. By the standards of the day, it was the most routine cargo imaginable. By the end of the day, it had produced the deadliest industrial accident in the history of the United States. This is Post-Mortem. We don't sensationalize, we reconstruct. Tonight, the deadliest industrial accident in American history, and the chain of misunderstandings, missing rules, and one fatal firefighting decision that turned a hold full of fertilizer into a bomb. We are going to walk it the way an investigator walks it. The chemical that nobody feared enough, the ship, the fire, the decision to seal the hold, the detonation, the second ship, and the rules that a destroyed harbor finally forced into being. To understand the disaster, you first have to understand the cargo, because the cargo is the whole story. Ammonium nitrate is a manufactured chemical compound. Its single most important use, by far, is as a fertilizer. It is rich in nitrogen, and nitrogen is what makes crops grow. For agriculture, ammonium nitrate is enormously valuable. An efficient, concentrated, manufactured way to put nitrogen into the soil. In the years after the Second World War, there was a strong drive to produce ammonium nitrate fertilizer in large quantities and ship it abroad to help feed and rebuild a damaged world. The fertilizer aboard the Grand Camp was part of that effort. It was, in every sense the people loading it understood, an agricultural product. A good thing, a cargo that would grow food. But ammonium nitrate has another property, and it is the property at the center of this episode. Ammonium nitrate is also an oxidizer, and under the right, or rather the wrong conditions, it can be made to explode. In normal handling, ammonium nitrate is stable. You can store it, ship it, pour it onto a field, and nothing dramatic happens. It does not burn easily on its own. It does not go off if you drop it. For ordinary purposes, it behaves like the harmless agricultural product it appears to be. But ammonium nitrate carries, locked inside its chemistry, a great deal of energy. And under conditions of strong heating, particularly heating while it is confined, while it is contained, while the heat and the gases it produces cannot escape, that stored energy can be released suddenly. The material can transition from simply being hot to decomposing fast to detonating. A detonation is not an ordinary fire and not even an ordinary explosion. It is a supersonic release of energy, a shock wave traveling through the material itself, and a large mass of ammonium nitrate brought to detonation releases an immense amount of energy very, very fast. So the cargo in the Grand Camp's holds had two natures. It was fertilizer, and it was, under conditions that no one loading it believed would ever occur, a high explosive. Now I have to be careful and exact about the state of human knowledge in 1947, because the deepest cause of this disaster was not malice, and it was not even, in the usual sense, negligence. It was a genuine, widespread, dangerous underappreciation of what ammonium nitrate could do. The explosive potential of ammonium nitrate was not a complete secret in 1947. There had been incidents in earlier years and in other countries in which ammonium nitrate or closely related material had detonated. The knowledge existed somewhere on paper among specialists, but it had not penetrated. The people who actually handled ammonium nitrate fertilizer in bulk, who manufactured it, bagged it, loaded it, shipped it, stored it on docks, did not, by and large, treat it as a potential high explosive. It was classified, handled, and thought of essentially as a fertilizer. On the docks of Texas City, ammonium nitrate was not regarded as a dangerous explosive cargo. It was loaded with ordinary cargo handling practices. People worked around it without the precautions that a genuine explosive would have demanded. This is the same shape this channel keeps finding. In the Tacoma Narrows episode, the killing physics, aeroelastic flutter, was known in one field and had not crossed into another. Here it is the same. The explosive hazard of ammonium nitrate was known to a few and unknown to the many, and the many were the ones loading the ship. The Grand Camp was a freighter of the type built in great numbers during the Second World War, a standard cargo ship by 1947 in commercial service. In April of that year, she was at Texas City, taking on a mixed cargo for a voyage overseas. Among that cargo, loaded into her holds, were thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer packaged in paper sacks. I want to describe how that fertilizer was packaged because it matters. The ammonium nitrate was in bags, paper bags, and the granular fertilizer in those bags had been treated during its manufacture with various coating substances. These coatings were intended to keep the granular material from caking, from clumping together into a solid mass in storage. Some of the substances involved in the manufacture and coating of that fertilizer were themselves combustible, and the bags, of course, were paper. So the cargo going into the Grand Camp's holds was not only ammonium nitrate, it was ammonium nitrate in combustible paper sacks with combustible material associated with its coating. None of that was understood at the time as assembling the ingredients of a disaster. It was understood as bags of fertilizer. But a hold being filled, sack upon sack, ton upon ton, with thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate was a hold being filled with an enormous confined mass of a material that could, if strongly heated, detonate. On the morning of the 16th of April, 1947, dock workers came aboard the Grand Camp to continue loading. And early that morning, while the loading was underway, a fire was discovered in one of the holds, the hold containing the ammonium nitrate. The exact cause of that initial fire was investigated and discussed, and the precise ignition source is not established with certainty. What is known is that somewhere in the cargo of the ammonium nitrate hold, a fire had begun. Smoke was seen, the fire was discovered, and it was, at that first moment, a relatively small thing, a fire among the sacks. And here begins the part of the disaster that is the hardest to absorb, because everything the people aboard the Grand Camp now did, they did with good intentions, with the firefighting knowledge of their time, and with absolutely no understanding that they were standing on top of a developing bomb. They were trying to put out a cargo fire. They did not know that the cargo, heated and confined, was the danger, and that some of the things you do to fight an ordinary fire are precisely the things that would drive this particular cargo toward detonation. I want to pause here, before the fatal decision, and lay out the situation the way an investigator would, because the picture is the explanation. In the hold of the Grand Camp was a confined mass of thousands of tons of ammonium nitrate, in paper sacks, with combustible coating material, and a fire was burning among it. The fire was producing heat. The heat was warming the surrounding cargo. The cargo, warmed and confined within the steel walls of the ship's hold, was being pushed, slowly at first, toward the conditions under which ammonium nitrate decomposes fast and can detonate. Every one of those facts is a whole in the sense this channel has used in every episode. A cargo with a misunderstood explosive nature, a packaging that added fuel, a fire that no one yet feared correctly, a steel hold that confined the heat, and a firefighting crew that had not been trained to know any of it. The holes were lining up, and the next decision, made for the best of reasons, lined up the last of them. When a fire is discovered in the hold of a ship, the crew has several ways to fight it, and each one is a real tool with real logic behind it. One option is to flood the hold with large quantities of water. Another is to fight it directly with hoses. A third, and this is the one that matters, is to seal the hold and smother the fire by depriving it of oxygen, often by closing the hatches and introducing steam into the closed space. Smothering a fire by sealing the space and cutting off its air is a sound, classic firefighting technique. For an ordinary cargo fire, it makes excellent sense. A fire needs oxygen. Take away the oxygen, and an ordinary fire goes out. In the case of the Grand Camp, there was also a specific concern about water. The cargo included the valuable ammonium nitrate fertilizer, and there was a reluctance to ruin a large cargo by flooding the hold. Sealing the hold and using steam promised to fight the fire while preserving the cargo. So the decision was made. The hatches over the burning hold were closed. Steam was introduced. The hold was sealed to smother the fire and protect the cargo. And that decision, made with sound conventional reasoning, was the decision that built the bomb. I want to explain, with care, exactly why sealing the hold was so catastrophically wrong for this particular cargo. Because the reason is the heart of the science of this disaster. Sealing a hold and smothering a fire works on a fire that needs external oxygen to burn. Take away the air and that fire dies. But ammonium nitrate is an oxidizer. As it decomposes under heat, it can supply oxygen from within its own chemistry. A mass of heated, decomposing ammonium nitrate does not simply stop because you have closed the hatches. It can sustain and accelerate its own decomposition without needing the air around it. So sealing the hold did not smother the danger. It did something far worse. It trapped the heat. The closed hatches and the steel of the hull held in the warmth the decomposing cargo was producing. The temperature of the cargo, instead of being able to lose heat to the open air, rose faster. And the pressure inside the sealed hold rose too, as the heated cargo produced gases. The crew believed they were starving the fire. What they were actually doing was building, inside a sealed steel container, exactly the conditions, rising heat, rising pressure, confinement, that drive ammonium nitrate from smoldering toward detonation. The smothering technique, correct for 1,000 ordinary fires, was precisely the wrong technique for this one, and it accelerated the disaster instead of stopping it. As the morning went on, it became clear to the people on and around the Grand Camp that the situation was not improving. The hold was hot. The hatches and the deck above the burning hold were affected by the heat from below. Smoke and the signs of a serious, growing fire were unmistakable. Water was by now also being applied. The firefighting effort intensified. And the disaster, as it grew, did something that any disaster involving a spectacular fire on a waterfront does. It drew a crowd. Word of the fire aboard the Grand Camp spread through Texas City. People came down toward the harbor to watch. The smoke from the ship was a striking, unusual color, and it was visible across the town. Onlookers gathered along the waterfront and on the docks. Among the people near the ship were the dock workers, the ship's crew, the firefighters, and a growing number of ordinary citizens drawn by the spectacle, standing close to a vessel that was, although none of them knew it, minutes from becoming the largest accidental explosion the country had ever seen. The crowd is one of the cruelest features of this disaster. The fire did not look like a thing that would kill the people watching it. It looked like a fire. And so people came to see it, and they came close. At a little after 9 o'clock on the morning of the 16th of April, 1947, the ammonium nitrate cargo of the Grand Camp reached the end of the slope. The heated, confined, decomposing mass in the sealed hold made the transition that ammonium nitrate in those conditions can make. It detonated. The entire cargo of ammonium nitrate in the ship's hold, thousands of tons of it, released its stored chemical energy in a single, near instantaneous detonation. I am going to describe the effects plainly, the way the record describes them, because the plain facts need no help. The Grand Camp was destroyed utterly, not damaged, not sunk in the ordinary sense, but disintegrated by the explosion. The detonation drove a shockwave outward across the harbor and the town. It threw debris, steel, fragments of the ship, parts of the cargo over an enormous area. The ship's heavy anchor was hurled a great distance and embedded itself far away. A column of smoke rose thousands of feet into the Texas sky. And the crowd that had gathered to watch the fire, the dock workers, the ship's crew, and the firefighters fighting the blaze, were, in that instant, at the center of it. The shockwave of the explosion did damage across Texas City. Buildings near the harbor were destroyed or wrecked. Windows were shattered far from the dock. The blast was felt and heard over a great distance. Tens of kilometers away, people knew that something enormous had happened. And the detonation did not confine its harm to the dock. Near the Grand Camp, packed close along that crowded industrial waterfront, were the facilities of the port's chemical and refining industry. Tanks, plants, storage. The explosion, the shockwave, and the storm of burning debris started fires across that industrial district. A waterfront that had been, an hour before, a busy, ordinary port was now a field of destruction and spreading fire. The people on the docks, the watchers, the workers, the crew, were overwhelmingly killed or injured in the instant of the blast. And among the dead was very nearly the entire Texas City Fire Department. The firefighters who had responded to the burning Grand Camp had been close to the ship, doing their jobs when it detonated. The town lost almost all of its firefighters in a single moment, and it lost them at the exact moment it was about to need them more than it ever had. The detonation of the Grand Camp was not the end of the Texas City disaster. It was the middle of it. Tied up in the same harbor, not far from where the Grand Camp had been, was another freighter. Her name was the High Flyer. And the High Flyer was also carrying ammonium nitrate fertilizer, along with other cargo in her holds. When the Grand Camp detonated, the High Flyer was damaged by the blast and showered with burning debris. A fire took hold aboard the second ship. And now the people of Texas City and the responders who came to help them faced the disaster's cruelest repetition. A second ship, loaded with the same misunderstood explosive cargo, was on fire in the same harbor, and the town that should have been fighting that fire had just lost almost its entire fire department in the first blast. Through the rest of the 16th of April and into the early hours of the 17th, the fire aboard the High Flyer burned. There were efforts to deal with her, including, at a late stage, an attempt to tow the burning ship away from the dock out of the harbor to get the dangerous cargo away from the town. That effort did not succeed in removing her in time, and in the early hours of the morning of the 17th of April, the day after the Grand Camp, the ammonium nitrate cargo of the High Flyer did exactly what the cargo of the Grand Camp had done. It detonated. A second great explosion tore through the harbor of Texas City. The disaster had now delivered two of the largest accidental explosions in the nation's history in the same harbor within a single day, and the second one fell on a town and a waterfront that had already been devastated by the first. The second explosion added its own toll of dead and injured, and its own destruction to a town that had almost nothing left to give. By the time the Texas City disaster was over, the Grand Camp, the fires across the industrial district, the High Flyer, the dead numbered close to 600 people. The exact figure has never been perfectly fixed, in part because some of those near the first blast were so completely caught in it, and in part because the harbor was crowded with workers and onlookers whose precise number was never known. Thousands more were injured. A large part of the port of Texas City and a large part of the industry crowded along it was destroyed or heavily damaged. Homes across the town were wrecked. It remains, to this day, the deadliest industrial accident in the history of the United States. And every life in that toll traces back to a cargo of agricultural fertilizer bound for farmland that the people handling it did not know was a bomb. I want to spend a scene on what happened in the hours and days after the explosions, because the response to the Texas City disaster is part of its meaning. The town faced a catastrophe of a scale it had no possible way to be prepared for. Its hospital was overwhelmed. Its emergency services had been gutted. The fire department all but destroyed in the first blast. The harbor was a field of fire and wreckage. Hundreds were dead and thousands hurt. And the response that came was in large part the response of ordinary people and of help arriving from outside. Aid came to Texas City from the surrounding region and from across the country. Medical help, emergency workers, volunteers, supplies, they converged on the stricken town. People who had survived the blasts turned at once to digging others out, to carrying the injured, to doing the work of a rescue service that had, in many places, ceased to exist. Temporary morgues and aid stations were set up. The wider community of the Gulf Coast and the nation moved to help. I want to mark the firefighters specifically, because the record marks them, and because this channel always marks them. The firefighters of Texas City had responded to a burning ship. They had stood close to the Grand Camp, fighting the fire, doing precisely the job they had sworn to do. They did not know, because almost no one knew, that the cargo they were fighting for was about to detonate. Almost the entire fire department of Texas City was killed in the first explosion. They are among the most directly identifiable victims of the disaster, and they died in the act of protecting their town from a danger whose true nature had been hidden from them by a general failure of knowledge. In the Piper Alpha episode, in the Bhopal episode, in the Chernobyl episode, in the Hindenburg episode, I have described the thin line of people who turn toward the danger because their job tells them to. At Texas City, that thin line was an entire town's fire department, and the disaster took nearly all of them at once. They turned toward a burning ship, not knowing it was a bomb, because turning toward burning ships was the job. There is no clearer statement of that particular courage, or of the particular cruelty of a hidden hazard, in the whole record of this channel. The Texas City disaster also moved afterward into the law and into the courts. The catastrophe raised hard and lasting questions about responsibility. The ammonium nitrate fertilizer had been produced under a government-associated program. Questions of who was liable for the disaster, of whether the government bore responsibility for the hazardous nature of a product made under its program, of how the victims and the town should be compensated, became the subject of long and significant legal proceedings. I am not going to walk you through the litigation in detail. It is long, it is technical, and it is its own separate subject. But I will tell you the one thing about the legal aftermath that belongs in a post-mortem episode. The Texas City case became an important moment in the law concerning when and whether a government can be held responsible for the consequences of its own programs and decisions. The disaster did not only reshape the handling of a chemical, it reshaped, in its own legal corner, the relationship between a government and the people harmed by what that government had set in motion. As in the Bhopal episode, the forensic question, what failed and why, proved easier for the world to answer than the question of justice. The chain of cause can be reconstructed. Whether the people of Texas City were ever made whole is a harder question and a sadder one. The Texas City disaster was investigated, and the investigations established in substance the anatomy of what had happened. And I want to give you that anatomy, the way this channel always does, as a chain, link by link, because the chain is the lesson. The first link is the cargo itself, ammonium nitrate fertilizer, a material with a real and serious explosive potential under conditions of strong confined heating, a potential that was known to specialists but was not understood, respected, or acted upon by the people who handled the material in bulk. The second link is the packaging and the handling. The fertilizer was in combustible paper sacks, associated with combustible coating material, loaded into the holds with ordinary cargo practices by people who did not regard it as a dangerous explosive. The third link is the fire, a fire that began in the hold by an ignition source never established with certainty among a cargo nobody yet feared correctly. The fourth link, and the fatal one, is the firefighting decision. The hold was sealed and steam was introduced to smother the fire and protect the cargo, a sound technique for an ordinary fire and exactly the wrong technique for ammonium nitrate because it trapped the heat and accelerated the decomposition that leads to detonation. And the fifth link is everything around the ship. A crowded waterfront where cargo docks, refineries, chemical plants, and a second ship full of the same cargo were packed close together, with no meaningful separation, no hazard planning, and a crowd of onlookers allowed to gather near a developing bomb. This is the pattern Post-Mortem returns to in episode after episode, and Texas City states it as starkly as any. A catastrophic accident is almost never one mistake and almost never one villain. It is a long line of small holes. Holes in the knowledge, holes in the packaging, holes in the procedures, holes in the firefighting doctrine, holes in the planning, holes in the law. Most of the time, those holes do not all line up. A cargo of misunderstood fertilizer crosses an ocean and nothing happens. A small fire on a ship is put out before it matters. But at Texas City on the 16th of April, 1947, every hole lined up. The misunderstood cargo, the combustible packaging, the fire, the smothering decision that trapped the heat, the crowded, unplanned waterfront. The path ran open and clear, all the way from a hold full of fertilizer to the deadliest industrial accident in the history of the United States. And the deepest hole of all, the one beneath all the others, was the simplest. The people of Texas City, the dock workers, the crew, the firefighters, the crowd, did not know what ammonium nitrate could do. The disaster was, before anything else, a catastrophe of missing knowledge. I want to be fair one more time before we leave the causes. It would be easy, with hindsight, to be harsh about the men who sealed the hold of the Grand Camp. They made the decision that built the bomb, but they made it with the firefighting knowledge of their time, with the entirely reasonable belief that ammonium nitrate fertilizer was fertilizer, and with the sound general principle that you smother a cargo fire by cutting off its air. They were not reckless men gambling with a known explosive. They were ordinary men applying ordinary doctrine to a cargo whose true nature the world had failed to teach them. The fault, the real fault, was not located in the hands that closed the hatches. It was located in the long, diffuse, system-wide failure that had allowed thousands of tons of a potential high explosive to be manufactured, packaged, loaded, and handled as though it were simply fertilizer. The men on the Grand Camp were the last link in the chain. They were not the chain. The chain had been forged, link by link, long before that fire was ever discovered. The Texas City disaster did not leave the handling of ammonium nitrate or the handling of hazardous cargo unchanged. No disaster of this magnitude ever does. The most important change was the most direct. After Texas City, the explosive hazard of ammonium nitrate could no longer be a thing known only to specialists. The disaster forced that knowledge into the open and into practice. Ammonium nitrate and ammonium nitrate-based fertilizers came to be recognized, classified, and regulated as materials with a genuine explosive potential. The way the material was manufactured, the way it was coated and stabilized, the way it was packaged, the way it was stored, the way it was loaded onto and carried by ships, all of it came under far more careful, far more knowledgeable rules. The doctrine for fighting a fire involving ammonium nitrate was rewritten by people who now understood that you do not smother it. You do not trap its heat, you flood it with water, and you get the people away. The single most important thing Texas City produced was the end of the ignorance. After 1947, the hazard of ammonium nitrate was no longer a secret hiding in a few technical papers. It was a known, taught, regulated fact. The disaster also reshaped more broadly how hazardous industry and hazardous cargo were planned and arranged. One of the quiet, terrible facts of Texas City was how everything was crowded together. Cargo docks, oil refineries, chemical plants, a second ship with the same cargo, and a town with its homes and its people, all pressed close along the same stretch of water, with no real separation, no buffer, no plan for what would happen if one of them went wrong. After Texas City, the questions of separation, of distance, of hazard planning, of where you put a dangerous facility relative to the people and to other dangerous facilities became questions that serious regulators and serious industry could no longer simply ignore. Emergency planning for industrial sites, the practical question of how you respond when the worst happens, became a more formal, more serious discipline. In the Bhopal episode, I said that distance is not glamorous, that it does not look like a safety system, but that on a still night with a heavy gas, distance is one of the only things that works. Texas City teaches the same truth in fire and shock instead of gas. The blast did not have to kill what it killed. A waterfront planned with separation between the explosive cargo and the refineries, between the docks and the town, between the first ship and the second, would have been a waterfront on which the detonation of the Grand Camp was a catastrophe, but a smaller one. The crowding was a decision, and the crowding was lethal. And Texas City reshaped, in its legal corner, the relationship between a government and the harm done by its programs. The disasters litigation became a landmark in the law of government responsibility, a hard, formal reckoning with the question of who answers for a catastrophe when the dangerous product at its center was made under a government's own program. I will not retrace the legal detail, but the principle the disaster forced into the open is worth stating. A catastrophe of this kind is not only an engineering failure or a firefighting failure. It is also a failure of responsibility, and the law, after Texas City, was compelled to grapple, more seriously than before, with where that responsibility lies. None of these changes, the regulation of ammonium nitrate, the rewritten firefighting doctrine, the planning, the separation, the legal reckoning, none of it happened because industry or government, left alone, decided to do better. It happened because close to 600 people died on a Texas waterfront in a single day, and the country could not look away from the size of it. I want to spend a scene, near the end, on a hard and important fact, because the Texas City disaster has a long shadow, and honesty requires me to follow it. Ammonium nitrate did not vanish from the world after 1947. It could not. It remains one of the most important fertilizers on Earth. It is still manufactured in enormous quantities. It is still stored in bulk. It is still loaded onto ships and carried across oceans because the world still needs to grow food, and ammonium nitrate still helps it do so. So the hazard that destroyed Texas City was not a hazard that the disaster allowed the world to be rid of. It is a hazard the world has chosen, of necessity, to keep living with. And the uncomfortable truth is that the lesson of Texas City, although it was learned, has had to be learned again. In the decades since 1947, there have been other ammonium nitrate disasters in other countries, at other ports, and other storage sites, other fires, other detonations, other towns harmed by a confined mass of fertilizer that was heated until it was no longer fertilizer. Each of those later disasters is, in its own way, a repetition of Texas City, and each one carries the same question. How does a hazard, once it has been so thoroughly and so bloodily demonstrated, manage to come back? The answer, when you study those later disasters, is the answer this channel keeps arriving at. A hazard does not stay respected on its own. The knowledge that ammonium nitrate can detonate is, after Texas City, written down, taught, and regulated. But knowledge that is written down is not the same as knowledge that is alive in the people handling the material on a particular hot afternoon at a particular port. Rules erode. Storage sites grow old. Towns grow up around facilities that were once isolated. The discipline of separation gets quietly compromised, building by building, permit by permit. The specific firefighting doctrine for ammonium nitrate gets forgotten by a fire crew that has never faced it. The same slow decline this channel found at the Bhopal plant, the same normalization this channel found on the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, works on the hazard of ammonium nitrate too. Texas City taught the world the lesson, but a lesson is not a fact of nature. It is a thing that has to be actively kept, retaught, reinforced, refunded, re-respected, generation after generation, or it decays. The cargo that erased a Texas waterfront in 1947 is still crossing the oceans tonight. Whether it ever does so again depends entirely on whether the lesson is being kept alive or whether it is being allowed, quietly, to be forgotten. In Texas City today, the disaster is remembered. There is a memorial to the dead of the 16th and 17th of April, 1947, to the dock workers, the crew, the onlookers, and the firefighters who lost their lives. The town rebuilt its waterfront and its industry, as towns do, and the Port of Texas City is a working harbor still. But the disaster is woven into the place. Some of those who died near the first blast were never identified, and they are remembered together. The Grand Camp's anchor, the great anchor hurled across the harbor by the detonation, was recovered, and it stands as a memorial. An enormous piece of iron, thrown like a stone by a cargo of fertilizer, now set quietly in the ground to mark what happened. That is the truth that Post-Mortem keeps returning to, and it is the truth I want to leave you with tonight. A cargo ship at a dock, like a chemical plant, like a reactor, like an airship, like a bridge, is a promise. It is a promise that the people who loaded it and the people who handle the things it carries understood what they were dealing with. At Texas City, that promise failed at its very root, not through malice, not even through ordinary negligence, but through a vast, shared, fatal gap in knowledge. The people loading the Grand Camp did not know they were loading a bomb. The firefighters who sealed her hold did not know they were building one. The crowd that gathered to watch did not know they were standing inside the blast radius of the deadliest industrial accident their country would ever see. None of the change that came afterward, the regulation, the rewritten firefighting doctrine, the planning, the separation, none of it happened because the world, left alone, decided to understand ammonium nitrate. It happened because close to 600 people died on a single waterfront in a single day, and the size of it could not be ignored. Thank you for sitting with this one. If reconstructions like this matter to you, subscribe. The channel is here for them.